All right, so we've got a pretty fascinating collection of UFO material here today. Um, Interviews, documents, even some hints at government cover-ups. It sounds like we're going deep into the world of ufology, and we've got a great guide for this journey. This deep dive is all about the work of Grant Cameron, a researcher who has spent decades trying to figure out the truth about UFOs. And you know what makes his story even more interesting is that it all started with a personal experience, like a UFO sighting that totally changed his perspective.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting about Cameron's story is that this wasn't just like a light in the sky or something. He's talking about a pulsating object moving slowly right in front of his car, not just a quick glance. This was an encounter that left him completely certain about what he saw.
Wow. I can only imagine how that would change someone's view. To go from being skeptical to feeling like you've seen something truly incredible. Did people believe him?
Well, that's where the idea of secrecy starts to come in. The reaction from people in his town was mostly denial and disbelief. It's almost like there's this resistance to accepting anything that challenges how we understand the world.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if there's a deeper reason for that resistance.
Right?
Something beyond just being skeptical. So, how did Cameron go from this personal experience to digging into government documents and presidential whispers?
His search for answers took him north to the Canadian government, specifically to the work of Wilbert Smith, a government engineer who was actually tasked with investigating UFOs back in the 1950s. And this was when the whole UFO thing was really starting to capture everyone's imagination.
So, we're talking about the very beginning of ufology, when governments were first trying to figure out this whole idea of unexplained things in the sky. What did Cameron actually find in those Canadian archives?
He found something called the Top Secret Memo. And it's as fascinating as it sounds. This memo straight up says that flying saucers are real, that the U.S. is keeping this whole thing super classified,
Yeah.
and that there's this small select group that's investigating the phenomenon.
Wait a minute, hold on. There's a real government document from way back in the 50s that says UFOs are real. This memo sounds like it's straight out of a movie.
It is pretty amazing. And it gets even more interesting when you find out who was supposedly leading this investigation. A guy named Dr. Vannevar Bush.
As in the same Dr. Vannevar Bush who was a big part of the Manhattan Project?
The one and only. And to make things even more mysterious, the memo hints at a possible link to what they call mental phenomena, which opens up a whole other can of worms.
Wow, okay. So we've got confirmation that UFOs are real. A top secret investigation led by a huge name in science, and a possible connection to ESP or something like that, all in a memo from 1950. But this memo was buried in Canadian archives. Why would the Canadians have this information?
That's a great question. It suggests that maybe there was some kind of international collaboration going on about UFOs even way back then. If that's true, what does that tell us about how big this phenomenon really is? Were multiple governments worried about it? Were they sharing information? Or were they keeping secrets from each other?
It's like a Cold War spy movie, but with UFOs instead of nuclear secrets. Did this memo give any clues about why they were keeping all of this so hush-hush?
There's one line in the memo that really stands out. Do not destroy these files until the subject cools off. I mean, that phrase says a lot.
It definitely sounds like they were trying to hide information on purpose. They knew this was something they didn't want the public to know about, at least not yet. So Cameron finds this shocking document in Canada. What does he do next?
He sets his sights on the United States. He figures that if the Canadians knew this much, the Americans must have even more secrets tucked away. And where does he go? Presidential libraries.
Presidential libraries. That's not exactly the first place I'd think of when it comes to UFO investigations. What was he hoping to find there?
He had this hunch, this feeling that if anyone at the top levels of government knew about UFOs, it would be the presidents themselves. He imagined those secret meetings, those whispers in the halls of power, maybe even hidden documents tucked away in those massive archives.
It's like a real-life treasure hunt. But instead of gold, he's after the truth about UFOs. So did he find what he was looking for?
What he found was a huge contrast. Millions and millions of pages of documents, but only a tiny handful that were actually about UFOs. Talk about searching for a needle in a haystack. But those few documents he did find were really revealing. For instance, he uncovered some telegrams that were sent to President Truman during those famous UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. back in 1952.
Oh, yeah, those are the sightings that really put UFOs on the map, weren't they? All those radar contacts and visual sightings by experienced pilots, it caused a huge commotion.
Exactly. And these telegrams were telling Truman not to shoot down those UFOs. There's even a story about Albert Einstein advising Truman to be careful.
Can you imagine how much weight that advice must have carried coming from someone like Einstein?
It sounds like there was real concern at the highest levels about provoking these unknown visitors. Like they knew they were dealing with something they didn't fully understand and that using the military might not be the best idea. Did Cameron find anything else besides those telegrams? Anything that pointed to a president being directly involved with the UFO issue? He did, and it happened at the Reagan Library almost by accident. Picture this. It's almost closing time. Cameron's about to leave empty-handed, and then he stumbles across a handwritten note from President Reagan himself.
This is where things get really interesting, right?
They do. This note was a request from Reagan asking for a section about possible contact with aliens to be put back into a speech he was going to give at the United Nations.
Wait a minute, Reagan was actually thinking about talking about aliens at the UN? That's a massive revelation.
It is. But it seems like someone, maybe a speechwriter, had taken that part out of the speech.
Sure.
And Reagan, in his own handwriting, insisted that it be put back in.
So someone was trying to keep a lid on this whole thing, even when it came to a presidential address on the world stage. What does that tell us about how much control and secrecy there was around the UFO issue?
It suggests that the suppression of information wasn't just happening in secret. It was happening at the very top levels of government. And it makes you wonder who was making those decisions and why.
Okay, so we've got a Canadian government memo that confirms UFOs exist, telegrams urging Truman not to shoot them down, and now evidence that Reagan himself considered publicly acknowledging the possibility of aliens. It's really starting to feel like there's a bigger story here, one that's been hidden from us for decades.
And that story takes an even more fascinating turn when we look at the role of a really powerful figure who's actually pushing for the government to reveal what it knows about UFOs. We're talking about Lawrence Rockefeller.
The Rockefeller.
As in one of the Rockefellers.
Yes. He was completely fascinated by the UFO phenomenon and was determined to get to the bottom of it. And he wasn't afraid to use his influence to try and force the government's hand.
So we've got a wealthy, influential person pushing for UFO disclosure. Who was he targeting with his efforts?
He focused on the Clinton administration, specifically trying to pressure them to reveal what they knew about UFOs. And what's really interesting is that Hillary Clinton herself played a significant role in this whole initiative.
Hold on. Hillary Clinton was involved in this? What exactly was she doing? She actually helped Rockefeller edit a letter demanding disclosure, and all the correspondence related to this initiative went through her office.
So there's a direct line of communication between a powerful advocate for UFO disclosure and the First Lady of the United States. That's a pretty big connection.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions. Was President Clinton aware of this? Was Hillary acting on his behalf? Or was she doing her own thing, maybe trying to keep the president from being directly involved?
It's like a political thriller with all these layers of secrecy and intrigue. It makes you wonder what they were so worried about. What were they trying to protect?
And then there's this recurring theme of MJ-12, which Cameron believes is a secret group that's in charge of managing the whole UFO issue.
MJ-12, could you explain that a bit more? I'm not familiar with that term.
MJ-12 is a name that comes up a lot when people talk about UFOs. Supposedly, it's this super secret group, maybe even operating outside of the normal government channels, that handles everything related to UFOs. Some people think it's all made up a conspiracy theory. But Cameron believes it's real. He thinks they're the ones calling the shots, controlling the information, and knowing the true extent of the UFO phenomenon.
Okay, so we've got government documents, whispers, and presidential libraries, a powerful person pushing for disclosure, and this shadowy group potentially running the show. It's a pretty tangled web of intrigue. Where do we go from here?
Well, the really interesting thing is how all these pieces connect. It suggests there's a level of control and secrecy around the UFO issue that's much bigger than most people realize. But the question is why? Why all the secrecy? What are they trying to hide? Or maybe what are they trying to protect us from?
That's a great question, and I think that's where we need to dig a little deeper. We've laid out the evidence and the key players, but now we need to connect the dots and try to understand the motivations behind all of this. And that's where things start to get really interesting.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into the possible reasons for all the secrecy, the potential consequences of revealing the truth, and the bigger questions about our place in the universe that all of this brings up.
You know, it's one thing to hear about all these separate pieces of evidence, like a memo here, a presidential note there, but when you start seeing how they all fit together, how they make up a bigger picture, it really makes you think.
What's really striking is how consistent the story becomes. You've got this Canadian memo that's basically a warning. Like, hey, this UFO thing, it's real, and it's a big deal. Then we see signs that the U.S. government knows about it, maybe even trying to avoid any kind of conflict. And through all of this, we keep hearing about this secret group, MJ-12, possibly managing everything behind the scenes.
Yeah.
It suggests a level of awareness and control that goes way beyond anything that's been officially acknowledged.
So it's not just a few random events or cover-ups. It's starting to look like there's a real plan, a long-term strategy for dealing with UFOs. But the question is, why? Why all this secrecy?
That's the big question, isn't it? It takes us past just government documents and into the realm of speculation of what could be. What if this is more than just national security? What if the truth about UFOs is so big, so world-changing, that we can't even imagine it?
Okay, now we're getting to the really good stuff. What kind of implications are we talking about here?
Just imagine for a second that the existence of extraterrestrial life is confirmed, without a doubt. Think about what that would do to our society, to how we see ourselves and our place in the universe.
It would be a massive shift in thinking. Everything we thought we knew would be questioned. Religions, government science.
Exactly. And that's why the question of why is so important. If the government really does have a long-term strategy for UFOs, it means they understand how huge this is. They know what's at stake, and they're trying to handle it carefully.
So maybe they're trying to protect us, or at least prevent widespread panic. By releasing information little by little, letting us get used to this mind-blowing idea that we're not alone in the universe. Like a global PR campaign for the existence of aliens.
That could be one explanation. But it's also possible that they're trying to control the story, to keep their authority in a world where that authority is suddenly challenged by something much bigger than they are.
So are we talking about benevolent protectors or people who are hungry for power and want to manipulate us? Or maybe somewhere in between? It's hard to know without knowing who's really in charge.
And that's the other big mystery, isn't it? Who's actually steering the ship? Is it the government? Is it this shadowy MJ-12 group? Or are there forces at work that we haven't even begun to consider?
You're right. We've been focusing a lot on the human side of things. The government, the secrecy, the possible cover-ups. But what about the aliens themselves? What do we know about why they're here? What their technology is like, their motivations?
That's the ultimate puzzle. We've got eyewitness accounts, blurry photos, ancient stories, but nothing concrete, no undeniable proof. Are they friendly explorers, curious observers, or something more sinister?
I have to admit, this is starting to feel a little bit like an X-Files episode. Are we talking about a possible alien invasion?
There's a lot of speculation about that. But the reality is, we just don't know. There's no evidence to suggest that they're hostile. In fact, some people believe they've been helping us, guiding our development, maybe even protecting us from ourselves.
Like some kind of cosmic guardians watching over us from the stars? That's a really interesting idea. But it's all just guessing at this point, right?
Right. We're dealing with a huge lack of information.
Right.
And that's what makes this whole topic so captivating.
Yeah.
It forces us to face the unknown, to question what we think we know, and to consider things that might seem crazy at first.
So what does it all mean? We've got government secrets, possible cover-ups, rumors of a secret group controlling everything, and a bunch of unanswered questions about the aliens themselves. What do we do with all of this?
That's the challenge. We have to keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and be open to the possibility that the truth might be weirder than fiction. We need to approach this with a sense of curiosity and wonder, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism.
It's like we're standing at the edge of this vast, unexplored territory. We've got glimpses of what might be out there, but the full picture is still a mystery.
And that's the beauty of it. It's a journey of discovery. You never know what you'll find around the next corner.
Speaking of journeys, Cameron's own path is fascinating. It all started with that personal experience, that UFO sighting that changed his whole life. It wasn't just some intellectual pursuit. It was something that really affected him, shook him to his core.
It's a reminder that sometimes it takes a personal encounter with something unexplained to really open our minds to the possibility that there's something more out there, something beyond what we currently understand.
It's like Dorothy opening that door in The Wizard of Oz and stepping into a world of color. Suddenly, everything is different.
Exactly. And that can be exciting and scary. It challenges what we believe, what we think we know about the world.
But it also opens up a world of wonder and possibility. It makes us ask questions, to explore, to consider that maybe there's more to reality than what we see.
It's like we're all standing on that doorstep, waiting to see what's beyond the curtain of what we currently know. But the question is, are we ready? Are you ready for the truth, whatever it might be?
That's something each of us has to answer for ourselves. But I think the fact that we're even having this conversation, that we're exploring these ideas, shows that there's a part of us that wants something more, something beyond the ordinary, something that broadens our horizons and challenges our assumptions.
And that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. It's a journey into the unknown, not just out there in the world, but within ourselves as well. It's a chance to question what we believe, to embrace the possibility of something truly extraordinary.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Government secrets, shadowy groups, philosophical implications, even a little bit of pop culture analysis. But before we wrap things up, I want to bring it back to you, the listener.
After taking this deep dive into this material, what do you think? Do you think the government is purposely releasing information about UFOs little by little? What are your thoughts on Grant Cameron's journey?
And if this gradual release of information is actually a plan, what might the next piece of the puzzle reveal? How could it change how we understand our place in the universe?
These are questions worth thinking about. The truth about UFOs might still be a mystery, but the search for answers is definitely a journey worth taking.
It really is amazing when you think about it. We started with one UFO sighting, and now we're talking about government cover-ups, secret groups, and maybe even a complete change in how we see the universe. And it all started with one man's search for answers.
You know what strikes me about all of this is how different Cameron's approach is. He doesn't fit that typical image of a UFO researcher. He's not out chasing lights in the sky or looking at blurry pictures. He went straight to the heart of it: government documents, presidential archives. He was searching for proof in the most unexpected places.
Yeah, it's like he's a detective putting a puzzle together, but the pieces are spread out over decades of history, hidden right in front of us. And every time he finds a new piece, the puzzle gets bigger.
And the mystery gets deeper. We've talked about government secrecy, the consequences of revealing the truth, the possibility of advanced technology from somewhere else. But there's something we haven't really talked about much. Something that Cameron himself finds really fascinating: the connection between UFOs and consciousness.
You mean that part in the Canadian memo about mental phenomena? That always seemed a little out there, even in this whole crazy story.
It's one of those things that really pushes the limits of what we consider normal when we talk about UFOs. Some researchers, like Cameron, think there's a deeper link between UFOs and what's going on in our minds than we currently understand. Maybe it's about how we see these objects, or maybe it's something even bigger.
So we're not just talking about spaceships here. We're talking about something that could change how we understand reality. That's a pretty big step, isn't it?
It is, and it's a step that a lot of scientists and skeptics aren't willing to take. But for people who have seen UFOs themselves or who really dug into the research, it's an idea that's hard to dismiss.
It's like that saying, any technology that's advanced enough looks like magic. Maybe we just don't have the tools yet to understand what we're dealing with.
And maybe the answers aren't just out there somewhere, but also inside us in our own minds.
That brings us back to the main question. Are we ready? Are we ready for the truth about UFOs, whatever that truth may be? Are we ready to face the possibility that we're not alone and that reality is much more complicated and strange than we ever thought?
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But I do believe that the more we learn about this, the more we ask these questions, the better prepared we'll be for what the future holds.
It's like we're all waking up together, slowly opening our eyes to a reality that's been hidden right in front of us for centuries. And as we go deeper into this mystery, we're not just learning about UFOs, we're learning about ourselves, about what we're capable of, about how big the universe is, and all the possibilities it holds.
We've only just scratched the surface today, but hopefully we've given you something to think about, some new ways to see things, and maybe even made you a little more curious to explore this on your own.
Remember, the truth is out there somewhere. In those government files, those whispered conversations, those personal stories, and those unexplained events, keep searching, keep asking questions, and never stop looking up.
Until next time, keep an open mind and stay curious.